Why did no one breathe when he hit her? That sound, a flat, wet crack that swallowed the noise in the gym, seemed to stop time itself. For 2 seconds, no one moved. Then the man who had thrown the slap, Lieutenant Ethan Bricks, blinked in disbelief, his smug grin collapsing into confusion. And the woman he'd struck just stood there. Sergeant Lee Monroe, early 30s, calm eyes the color of steel under cloudlight. Her face barely turned from the impact. A small scar, a pale slash across her left cheek, caught the glare from the overhead lamps and threw it back like a mirror. She did not flinch. She did not answer. She only breathed slow, measured, the way you breathe when you've been in worse places than this. Brick's chest heaved once. And then, before anyone understood what they were seeing, he was on the floor flat on his back, gasping, staring at the ceiling, the wind stolen from his lungs by a movement no one could follow. The laughter that had filled the training hall just moments before evaporated, leaving a silence thick enough to cut with a knife. The recruits froze. They didn't know what to do, whether to help him up or to look away. Because deep down, every single one of them had felt it, that split second when arrogance met precision and lost. Fort Moore, Georgia. The smell of sweat, rubber, and nerves. Boots scuffed against mats, bodies leaned shoulder to shoulder, whispering. They'd gathered to watch Bricks, loud, broad-shouldered, the kind of officer who measured worth in volume, demonstrate combat realism. They didn't expect a lesson in silence. Lee hadn't come here for attention. Her transfer orders had been labeled administrative reassignment, 2 words that hide more than they explain. She unpacked fast, kept to herself, and by dawn the next morning she was already on the mats, training alone while the base still slept. At 32, she was older than most in her unit, but the way she carried herself erased the difference. Everything about her was precise. Her boots lined, her bunk made tight, her voice low and clear. When others complained about the drills or the humidity, she just listened. No jokes, no stories, no boasting. Her scar, that faint diagonal line across her cheek, always caught someone's eye. Some said it looked like a knife mark. Others whispered it was from a training accident. She never confirmed either. When someone finally asked, she said only, "It's old," and changed the subject. Lieutenant Bricks noticed her the first week. She was too quiet, too competent, too unbothered by him. For a man who lived on attention, silence was an insult. He started small, the usual barbs soldiers toss when they feel insecure. "Paper Ranger," he called her once, after she submitted a flawless report. "Company soldier," he sneered another time, loud enough for others to hear. She never took the bait. "Sir," she would say evenly, always evenly, and go back to work. But what really got under his skin was how the others began to watch her instead of him. When a recruit faltered, she ran beside him and whispered advice under her breath. When someone failed a grip test, she corrected the stance, not the person. Her voice was calm, patient, never proud. By the second week, she'd earned what Bricks craved most: respect, and she'd done it without raising her voice once. Night after night, when the others scrolled through their phones or laughed over mess hall stories, she stayed behind. The lights dimmed, the mats cooled, and her breathing echoed softly in the empty room. She practiced rolls, controlled falls, transitions. Movements so fluid, they felt memorized from another life. Not learned, remembered. Sometimes when the air turned still enough, she could hear it again. The hiss of surf against rubber hulls. The metallic scent of salt and oil. The engine's growl across black water. In those moments, she was Sergeant Monroe anymore. She was something else. Someone from missions that never made the news. But those ghosts stayed, locked behind her discipline. Bricks couldn't leave it alone. Each time she refused to react, his frustration grew. Each nod she received from a recruit, each quiet "thank you, ma'am," was another crack in his pride. And men like Bricks, when they feel small, don't look inward. They look for someone to crush. He waited. He watched. And one Friday, with the air heavy and the week long, he found his stage. The gym was packed. The recruits were restless. Bricks stood in the center, boots planted wide, that predatory grin already curling his lips. He called it a realism exercise. But everyone felt what it really was, a reckoning. "Sergeant Monroe," he barked. "Front and center." She stepped forward without hesitation. No swagger, no fear. Just that same calm rhythm, inhale, exhale. "Let's show them," Bricks said, "how to handle a threat." His voice carried arrogance wrapped in authority. "Yes, sir." The circle tightened. The recruits leaned in. Some smiled nervously, others looked away. Bricks began to speak about leverage and body mechanics, waving his arms like a man explaining what he didn't truly understand. Then, eyes fixed on Lee, he added, "Remember, men, mass wins fights. Physics doesn't care about feelings." A few chuckled, others didn't. Lee's expression never changed. He called up 5 recruits, one after another, to face her. The first rushed in too fast. A heartbeat later, he was flat on the mat, blinking at the ceiling. She helped him up gently. "Reset," she whispered. The second grabbed her neck in a sloppy clinch. She stepped in, broke his posture, turned, and let gravity finish the job. He landed breathless and a little wiser. The third hesitated. That was worse. She redirected him with a flick of her wrist and sent him sprawling, unharmed but humbled. One by one they came, and one by one they fell, each in silence, each with grace. The room reacted as soldiers do when they don't know whether to laugh or respect what they see. A few clapped, a few crossed their arms. Bricks clapped too, slowly, mockingly. "Careful, gentlemen," he called out. "She's fragile." Laughter rippled through the ranks again, smaller this time, uneasy. Leigh didn't move. She just breathed steady, grounded. Even now, her stillness unsettled them more than any punch could have. Bricks wasn't done. He couldn't be. He circled her like a wolf that had already lost, but didn't know it yet. "Must be nice," he said, his tone dripping. "A whole career behind a desk. Bet you've never heard live fire." He didn't say woman, he didn't need to. Everyone heard it anyway. Lee's eyes didn't flicker. "Sir," she said softly, "that's enough." He stepped closer. Too close. The recruit stiffened. Bricks smiled for the crowd. Then he reached out, gripped her wrist too hard, and yanked. It wasn't instruction, it was dominance. "See," he called out, "theory doesn't save you from contact." Her voice came low. "Sir, that's enough." He didn't stop. And then, the moment burned into every witness forever. He raised his hand and slapped her. Full palm. Full force. The sound cracked like a rifle shot. The fluorescent lights hummed. Nobody breathed. Lee's head turned from the impact just slightly. When she looked back, her expression hadn't changed. Bricks opened his mouth to say something, a victory line maybe, but the words never came. It happened faster than understanding. A small shift of weight. A quarter turn of her hips. Her left hand guided his elbow, her right controlled his wrist. His balance vanished. Gravity and leverage conspired against him. In one clean motion, she took him down, not with violence but with inevitability. He hit the mat hard, the air rushing from his lungs. "Sir," she said evenly. "Stop fighting, exhale." He tried. The sound that came out was a ragged wheeze. Around them no one spoke. Those who recognized the move saw the restraint. Those who didn't only felt the authority of it. It wasn't aggression. It was mastery. She released him, slowly, giving him space to recover his dignity if not his pride. Then she stepped back, standing at attention as if nothing had happened. Brix rose unsteadily. His face burned red. He tried to speak, but even his arrogance couldn't find footing in that silence. Lee stood still, eyes forward. Her voice calm as ever. "Yes, sir." That was all. And everyone understood something irreversible had just shifted. Not just in rank, but in respect. When the session ended, no one clapped. No one laughed. Brix left without a word, his boots echoing down the hall until the sound disappeared. The recruits stayed behind, unsure what to do with what they'd just witnessed. Some lingered, others fumbled with gear, pretending to clean up. Lee knelt, began to align the mats, one edge at a time, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. Her movements were slow, deliberate, peaceful, a discipline that came from somewhere far beyond the barracks. Private Miller, youngest in the class, noticed it first. As Lee reached forward, her sleeve slid up. A black ink trident glimmered faintly under the sweat and light, etched into the skin of her forearm. Faded, weathered, old. The kind of mark that salt water erases but never forgets. Miller froze. He'd seen that symbol before, not in the army. His brother was a Navy diver. And that symbol belonged to the SEALs. He whispered to the man beside him, "That's a SEAL insignia." The reply came uneasy, "Can't be, she's Army." But conviction wavered in both their voices. Lee pulled her sleeve back down. No reaction, no explanation. Outside, the murmurs had already begun to spread, quiet, electric. By nightfall, the entire base would be whispering the same impossible question. Who exactly is Sergeant Lee Monroe? That night, while others argued over theories and rumors, Lee sat alone on the edge of her bunk. The air outside hummed with insects. Her hands rested on her knees, still and calm. Inside her head, the ocean never stopped. The memory of engines, of night vision green over black water, of men's voices carried away by wind. She closed her eyes. And for the first time in months, she let herself remember them. The ones who never came back. Then she whispered, barely audible, "Still here." She reached up, traced the faint scar on her cheek. The story no one would ever fully know. And breathed out the kind of breath that soldiers take when they're learning to live with what they've survived. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It just acts. And when it does, it changes the room forever. Why did the rumor spread faster than any order ever could? Because in Fort Moore, whispers move quicker than radio signals. By dawn, everyone knew. Or thought they did. The one who dropped Brix, she's former Navy. Special warfare, they said. No way, SEALs don't transfer to Army posts. But the words had already taken root, passing from hallway to hallway like contraband truth. Lee Monroe walked through it all quiet, upright, the same unhurried rhythm. She neither denied nor confirmed. She simply existed, which somehow made the story more believable. Brix avoided her. His pride wore a bruise he couldn't cover with protocol. He told himself it had been an accident, bad footing, bad timing, but every time he heard a door slam, he felt the echo of that fall in his chest. The recruits watched him differently now. They saluted, yes. But their eyes flicked toward Lee first, unconsciously, as if to take their cue from her composure. And that quiet shift humiliated him more than any physical wound. Lee kept her routine unchanged. No deviation, no indulgence. Before sunrise, she was on the mats. Always barefoot, always alone. The floor squeaked under her weight as she moved, measured, fluid, exact. The sounds of morning hadn't even started yet. No cadence calls, no vehicles, just the rhythmic exhale of a soldier who had made peace with repetition. She wasn't chasing fitness. She was keeping ghosts at bay. Every fall she practiced was a controlled descent into memory, the slap of her back against the mat mimicking waves hitting metal hulls. Each roll ended in a still point, the kind of stillness you learn when waiting for orders that might never come. She wasn't training for combat. She was maintaining silence, the kind forged in places the world pretends don't exist. Later that morning, she stood outside the barracks as the flag climbed the pole. The anthem played. The air was thick with humidity and ritual. Hands went abrows, lips tightened in discipline. Lee's hand rose a second late, not from hesitation, but from a private thought she couldn't quite drown. She remembered a different flag, the way it looked through salt spray and searchlights, and the sound that followed, gunfire swallowed by ocean wind. Someone behind her coughed, breaking the moment. She lowered her hand, blinked once, and returned to the present. Inside the mess hall, conversation fell when she entered. It wasn't deliberate, it was instinct. The kind of hush that happens when people sense they're near a story still being written. She took her tray, filled it with the usual eggs, black coffee, nothing else, and sat alone near the wall. Across the room, recruits leaned close over their plates. One of them whispered, "You think it's true?" Another shrugged. "My cousin's in Bahrain Command. He said a female operator went dark after a mission went bad. Could be her." Lee ate in silence, the fork scraping softly against the tray. She didn't look up. Didn't need to. You don't survive that long in shadows without learning how to listen. The voices blended, fragments of half-truth, speculation, awe. She swallowed her last bite, set the tray down, and stood. As she passed their table, she paused for just a breath. Her voice came calm, almost kind. "Rumors," she said, "don't keep you alive, discipline does." Then she left. Her boots echoed like punctuation, marks on a sentence they didn't yet understand. That evening, the sun bled out behind the tree line. Bricks found her again by accident or by guilt, even he wasn't sure. She was kneeling near the training bay, tapping a worn section of mat. He hesitated, then forced himself forward. The words he'd rehearsed all day scattered like loose shells. "Sergeant." She looked up, no anger, no warmth either. "Sir." I overstepped during the demonstration." Her gaze held steady. "Yes, sir." "I meant it was about control. The recruits need to see." She cut in softly. "They saw." The silence that followed was worse than any reprimand. He shifted his weight, trying to find authority again, but it slipped from him like sand through gloves. "Look, I just wanted to clear the air." Lee wiped a hand on her pants and stood. "You don't clear the air, sir. You live with what's in it." Then, almost gently, "Next time, teach them something worth remembering." She walked past him, leaving the smell of mat cleaner and humility behind. Brick stared after her, jaw tight. The words stung because they were true. Night. Lee sat on the steps outside the barracks, the sky bruised with stormlight. Rain hadn't come yet, but the air was heavy with it. She held a small object between her fingers, a silver coin worn smooth at the edges. The emblem was almost faded, but you could still make out the trident, the anchor, the pistol, the eagle. Challenge coin. Unit specific. One she'd never meant to keep, but couldn't let go. Her thumb rubbed across the surface, tracing the grooves that time hadn't erased. Her breathing slowed. In the distance, cicadas sang like static. For a moment, the bass disappeared. She was back there, the stench of diesel and salt, the voices over comms, the flash of tracer fire painting the night. A man screaming through static, "We're losing the pier." Another voice, calm, hers, "Hold position, extraction inbound." And then silence. the kind that never ends. Her eyes opened. Back to Georgia, back to now. The coin lay in her palm, glinting under the faint barracks light. She closed her fist around it. Some weights you don't drop, you learn to carry them quieter. The next morning she was early again. The first recruit arrived while she was already stretching, sweat dampening the mat in neat geometric patches. He paused in the doorway, watching. "Morning, Sergeant," he said. "Morning," she replied without looking up. He hesitated. "Is it true what they say?" Lee finished her stretch, stood and faced him. "True or not," she said, "it doesn't change how we train." He nodded, embarrassed, but she wasn't finished. "You want to know a secret?" He blinked. "Yes, ma'am." She stepped closer, her tone almost whisper-soft. "The only people who care where you came from are the ones afraid of where you're going." The recruit nodded slowly, not fully understanding but knowing it mattered. "Now," she said, "show me your grip." The lesson began. No further questions. By midday, the rumor had reached command desks. Folders opened, clearance codes flashed. Somewhere above Lee's pay grade, someone typed her name and frowned at the redacted lines that followed. But down on the floor, none of that mattered. The recruits learned faster under her guidance. Her calm infected them. Even the ones who doubted her now watched with an admiration they didn't try to hide. When she demonstrated a hold, they mimicked it with reverence. When she corrected posture, they straightened not from fear but from respect. She was teaching more than technique. She was teaching balance, the kind that holds under pressure, under humiliation, under fire. That evening, she returned to her bunk and found an envelope on her bag. No name, no insignia, just an official seal pressed into plain white paper. She turned it over once before opening it. Inside, a single sheet. Subject: inspection unannounced. Command presence required. Her eyes lingered on the words command presence. She folded the paper once, twice, slipped it into her pocket. Then she sat, laced her boots, and exhaled. Whatever was coming, she'd faced worse. Just not here. Not yet. Morning broke like steel, sharp light, sharp voices, sharp expectation. The intercom crackled to life. "Attention all personnel, inspection protocol commencing. Command staff inbound." Chairs scraped. Boots thundered. The base came alive in a frenzy of polishing, aligning, pretending nothing ever happened. Lee worked quietly, sweeping the mats, rearranging gear with deliberate calm. While everyone else scrambled, she moved like someone who'd already passed the only inspection that mattered: survival. Brick stood across the hall, pretending to issue orders, but his eyes tracked her movements. He couldn't stand that poise, that stillness, as if she'd been waiting for this moment all along. He turned away before she caught him looking. Moments later, the doors opened. A cluster of officers entered, medals, notebooks, the heavy air of authority. At their center walked a man whose presence changed the room before he spoke. Command Sergeant Major Robert Hayes. Broad shoulders, calm eyes, the kind of authority that didn't need volume. Every soldier straightened instinctively. "Carry on," he said, voice low but carrying. "Treat this as an ordinary day." The inspection began. Clipboards, notes, calculated silence. Then a sound cut through the routine. A sharp cry. Private Daniels, youngest of the new class, had tripped over a loose mat edge and gone down hard. The crack of bone on floor echoed like a rifle report. Chaos followed. Shouting, hands everywhere, too many orders, none correct. And then Lee's voice. Steady, calm, precise. "Stop." Everything froze. She was already kneeling beside the boy, her movements exact, confident. "Breathe," she told him, checking the fracture, the pulse, the bleeding. Pressure here, not there, strap above the joint. Use your belt, not the cord. Her tone wasn't loud, but it carried the gravity of someone who'd done this before, under worse light. Within seconds, the bleeding slowed, the breathing steadied, the panic dissolved. The medics rushed in and stopped dead. The lead paramedic looked at her, eyes wide. "Ma'am, I know you," he stammered. "You were in Bahrain, weren't you, when the pier collapsed, you?" Lee didn't look up. "Focus on your patient, Corporal." He swallowed, "Yes, ma'am." But his voice carried something the room couldn't unhear, reverence. The officers exchanged looks. Brick's stomach turned to ice. Hayes said nothing. He just watched. When the medics carried the injured recruit out, Lee stood, wiped her hands, and stepped back into formation as if nothing unusual had occurred. But the silence that followed was different this time. Not shock. Recognition. That night no one told new rumors. They didn't have to. Truth had walked into the room on its own. And somewhere in the dark barracks, Lee lay awake, eyes open, listening to the rain finally fall. Each drop a reminder that even storms end in calm. She reached toward the faint scar on her cheek and whispered, "I didn't leave you behind." The coin on her nightstand caught the flash of lightning, trident, anchor, eagle. A story she would never tell. A burden she would never drop. Outside, thunder rolled over Fort Moore, but inside, everything was still. Because sometimes, the loudest proof of strength is silence that commands a room. Why did the command sergeant major stay behind after everyone else left? Because he'd seen something he couldn't categorize with paperwork. Robert Hayes lingered at the edge of the training bay, long after the others had filed out. The mats still smelled of sweat and disinfectant. The air still carried the static hum of adrenaline slowly fatting. He stood there, arms folded, eyes fixed on the woman who had steadied chaos with nothing more than tone and breath. Lee Monroe was alone again, wiping the mats, methodical as always. Every motion measured, deliberate not from obsession, but from ritual. He recognized it. He'd seen the same rhythm in combat medics, in bomb techs, in those who learned to live inside the pause before disaster. He stepped forward, his boots soft on the rubber floor. "Sergeant." She looked up, "Sir." "Good work today." "Just doing my job." He studied her for a long moment. "That's exactly what I'm curious about." Her expression didn't change. "Meaning." Hayes let out a slow breath. "Meaning the way you took control of that scene. You didn't hesitate, didn't ask permission. You spoke like someone who's done that before. A lot." She wiped her hands on a towel. "Training, sir." He smiled faintly. "That kind of training doesn't come from Fort Moore." Their eyes met. For a heartbeat, the space between them filled with everything unsaid, the classified, the redacted, the buried. Then she broke the gaze. "If you'll excuse me, sir, I need to sanitize the mats before night rotation." Hayes nodded once, stepping aside. He didn't press, not yet. But as he left, he murmured to himself, "You can hide a record, not a reflex." Word of the incident traveled faster than orders again. Only this time, it didn't move like gossip. It moved like awe. The recruits spoke quietly in the mess hall, not daring to raise their voices. The way she'd commanded the room. The way the medic had recognized her. The way even Hayes had stopped to watch. No one called her Paper Ranger anymore. Now they called her ma'am without sarcasm. And for the first time in years, Lee felt eyes on her that weren't hostile, and that scared her more than contempt ever had. Respect meant attention. Attention meant questions. Questions led to files that should have stayed closed. That night she sat on the lower bunk, her duffel open in front of her. Inside, folded uniforms, a worn towel, and one sealed envelope. The same one she'd kept untouched since arrival. She ran a thumb along its edge. The seal had begun to peel. A faint emblem showed beneath the light, eagle and anchor. She pressed it flat again and slid it back under her gear. Some stories weren't meant for daylight. The next morning, Lieutenant Brix couldn't sleep. He'd spent hours rewriting the report about unauthorized physical contact during demonstration, trying to make his humiliation look procedural. He sent it to command. Then he waited. No reply. No acknowledgement. When he called the office, the clerk on the other end spoke too formally, too carefully. "Your report is being reviewed, sir, pending verification." Verification. The word chilled him. What exactly were they verifying? He wasn't sure anymore whether he wanted to know. He looked across the courtyard, where Lee crossed toward the gym, her uniform crisp, her face unreadable. For the first time, he felt something he didn't recognize toward her, not anger, not even fear. It was respect poisoned by shame. Later that week, during an early morning conditioning session, Hayes returned. No entourage this time, no clipboard. He stood silently in the doorway as the class ran drills. Lee moved among the recruits, correcting footwork, aligning shoulders, offering quiet words that cut sharper than any shout. Breathe through it. Find balance before strength. Stillness isn't weakness, it's aim. Her voice carried the rhythm of oceans and engines and years of muscle memory. When she turned and finally saw Hayes watching, she nodded once. He gestured for her to continue. She finished the sequence, dismissed the class, and approached. "Sir." He held out a tablet. "You know what this is." She didn't look at it. "I can guess." He tapped the screen. Red letters glowed across the display. Classified, NAVSPECWAR command access required. The recruits who hadn't yet left froze mid-step. The hum of the fluorescent lights grew louder, or maybe the air just went thinner. Hayes spoke quietly, but every word carried. "Are you Chief Petty Officer Lee Monroe, Naval Special Warfare Group 2, Detachment 7? The question landed like a detonation in slow motion. Lee didn't move. Didn't blink. Then she said simply, "I was." The room stopped breathing. Hayes nodded once, not surprise, confirmation. He turned to the gathered soldiers. "This woman," he said, "served with DEVGRU 7 operational deployments, sea, desert, and city. She trained men twice her size and carried them home when they couldn't walk." No one spoke. The words felt heavy, sacred. Brix stood at the far edge of the mat, his complexion drained of color. Hayes' voice softened. "Some of you think strength is loud. It is. Sometimes it's this." He gestured toward her, a scar, a calm, a heartbeat steady as tide. Then he did something no one expected. He raised his right hand. A perfect salute. Lee hesitated just a breath, then returned it precise and unshaken. And in that shared silence, something ancient passed between them, recognition of service that never needed to be spoken aloud. When Hayes lowered his hand, he faced the room again. "You'll treat Sergeant Monroe with the respect her record demands. More importantly, with the respect her conduct has earned." Then quietly to her, "Your file can stay closed if you wish." Lee's answer was instant. "Close it, sir." He nodded, locked the screen, and left. No ceremony. No applause. Only the kind of quiet that redefines a place. Afterward, no one moved. The recruits still stood at attention, unsure what to do with their hands, their thoughts, their admiration. Brix swallowed hard and stepped forward. "Permission to speak, Sergeant Major," he called, voice cracking. "Denied," Hayes said without turning. Then softer, "Let her answer." Brix faced her, the woman he'd once tried to humiliate. "Ma'am," he faltered. The word ma'am felt inadequate. "I didn't know." Her reply came low, even. You never asked." The sentence landed heavier than a punch. He bowed his head. "No, ma'am, I didn't." When the others left, Lee stayed behind, kneeling once more to realign the mats. She worked in silence until she reached the corner where bricks had fallen days before. The surface there was still faintly scuffed, a small shadow of impact. Private Miller approached hesitantly, a marker in his hand. "Sergeant." She looked up. He crouched, drew a small black X on the mat where Brick's pride had met gravity. "What's that?" she asked. "Reminder," he said softly, "where arrogance fell." She almost smiled. "Keep it clean, then." "Yes, ma'am." From that day on, the mark stayed. No order erased it, no cleaning crew removed it. It became part of the floor, a tiny scar that mirrored hers. Days turned into weeks. Training continued, but the tone was different now. Sharper, quieter. Recruits began calling the marked corner Monroe Point. No memo made it official. It didn't need to be. They said when you trained near it, you unconsciously stood taller. Some swore the air smelled faintly of salt. And though Lee said nothing, she felt it too, that strange pull of memory wrapped in discipline. One evening, Bricks came back. No audience this time. The gym was empty except for her, and the sound of mop water dripping into a bucket. He stood for a long time before speaking. "You've taught me more than I taught any of them." She didn't look up. "We all keep learning, sir." He followed her gaze to the dark X in the corner. "I won't forget that spot," he said. "I hope you won't," she answered quietly. He nodded once and left. The door clicked shut behind him, not in defeat but in understanding. Outside, the night was calm. Lee sat on the steps again, the same silver coin turning slowly between her fingers. Somewhere out there, waves hit unseen shores, and wind whispered through lines of names carved on memorial walls. She breathed in the damp Georgia air, felt it fill her lungs, and exhaled. Her past had caught up, but this time it hadn't come to haunt her. It had come to remind her she'd survived it. The scar on her cheek gleamed faintly in the moonlight. She touched it, not with regret, but with gratitude. Because sometimes the past doesn't break you. It just waits. For the moment, you're strong enough to stand beside it without fear. Why did the email come at 02:47 a.m.? Because news that travels in daylight can be denied, but the kind that comes in darkness carries intent. The message was short. From COMNAVSBCWRCOM Liaison. Subject: Reinstatement Request. Immediate review. Body: Former CPO Lee Monroe is requested to report for preliminary briefing. Fort Moore, 800. No signature. No explanation. Just coordinates, time, and silence between the lines. Lee stared at the glow of the screen until her eyes burned. Then she powered it off, set it face down, and sat there in the dark. Outside, thunder murmured along the horizon, too far to hear clearly, but close enough to feel. Rain tapped against the window in uncertain rhythms, like a question she didn't want answered. By morning, the sky hung low and gray. The parade ground glistened, with puddles that mirrored the barracks' lights. She walked across it alone, the email folded in her pocket, her boots cutting small splashes that vanished instantly behind her. The briefing room smelled of paper, coffee, and anticipation. 3 officers waited inside: Hayes, a civilian in a gray suit, and a woman in navy khakis who carried herself like she'd flown through too many storms to care about protocol. "Take a seat, Sergeant," Hayes said. She did. The civilian opened a folder. "Chief Monroe." Lee interrupted softly. "It's Sergeant now." "Not for long if command has its way," he said, glancing at the Navy officer. "Lieutenant Commander Ruiz, SEAL Liaison." Ruiz nodded once. "We've been looking for you." Lee's voice stayed even. "I wasn't hiding." No, Ruiz said, just gone. Hayes leaned forward. What's this about? Ruiz slid a tablet across the table. Footage, grainy, night vision green. A small pier. Figures moving under tracer fire. A woman's voice over comms, calm, measured. Lee's. Operation Tideglass, Ruiz said. 3 years ago, the mission went south after extraction was compromised. We lost 6 operators. The after-action report listed you MIA. You resurfaced 6 months later in Bahrain. No formal debrief. No closure. Lee's fingers curled around the edge of the table. Closure, she repeated. We dragged half our team out under fire, the rest. Her breath caught, she looked away. The rest didn't make it. That's all the closure there is. Ruiz studied her. Command wants you back on record. Advisory capacity, training redesign. Lee shook her head. No. You'd be helping future teams avoid what happened. I already am, she said, right here. Hayes spoke quietly. They can't force her, can they? Ruiz hesitated. They can request, and given her file, they will. After the meeting, Hayes followed her outside. Rain had eased into mist. Sunlight strained through the clouds like a tired promise. What are you thinking? He asked. That some ghosts don't like being named. He nodded. You don't owe them anything. Her eyes lifted to the flag, heavy with water. Maybe I do. He waited, then said softly, don't mistake guilt for duty. She gave a small, weary smile. Sometimes they wear the same uniform. Days passed with the weight of waiting. The base continued drills, mess, lights out, but a subtle tension threaded through everything. People spoke to her differently now. Not louder, not quieter, just with a kind of distance reserved for legends that might vanish again. At night she dreamed of surf and static. Voices shouting through headsets. A hand slipping from hers in black water. And that single, unbearable sound, a breath cut short mid-sentence. She woke each time before the splash. Each time her heart already pounding. One evening, Ruiz found her in the gym. Lee was alone, hands wrapped, hitting the heavy bag with slow, rhythmic strikes. Not aggression, control. Ruiz watched for a minute before speaking. You could have been running your own detachment by now. Could have, Lee said. Why didn't you? Lee kept striking, thud, exhale, thud. Because I brought them home in body bags. That doesn't feel like leadership. Ruiz stepped closer. You think sitting here teaching recruits fixes that? No, Lee said, but it keeps me from breaking anything else. Ruiz sighed. Command will send official orders within 48 hours. Consultancy, classified tier. They'll dress it as voluntary, but it is. Be ready. Then she left, her footsteps echoing like the countdown of a clock Lee couldn't stop. That night, Hayes joined her on the steps outside the barracks. He carried 2 mugs of coffee, steam rising like faint ghosts between them. Bad news travels fast, he said. Faster than orders. They're recalling you. She nodded. Will you go? I don't know. The rain started again, softer this time, a whisper against the eaves. Hayes stared into the dark. You know, I've been in long enough to tell the difference between a soldier who's running and one who's resting. You're not resting. Lee looked at him. You ever lose people under your command? He nodded once. All leaders do. Then you know the hardest part isn't losing them. It's living in the space where they should still be. He said nothing. There was nothing to say. Morning brought the inevitable. An unmarked SUV waited near the gate, engine idling. Ruiz stood beside it, clipboard in hand. Lee approached in silence, duffel slung over her shoulder. Her uniform was pressed, her eyes unreadable. Hayes met her halfway. I signed you out for 48 hours. After that, they own the schedule. She nodded. He held out his hand. For what it's worth, Sergeant, I'm glad the world gets to see who trained my people." She shook it firm. "Take care of them," she said. "I will." As she turned toward the vehicle, he called after her, "And take care of yourself, Chief." She didn't answer, but her slight nod against the rain said enough. The drive was quiet. Ruiz didn't speak. Lee didn't ask. Pine trees blurred past, the world outside half fog, half memory. At one point, Ruiz glanced at her reflection in the window. "You could refuse formal reinstatement," she said. "Invoke medical exemption." Lee's eyes stayed on the road. "You think I want the exemption?" "No, I think you want peace." Lee smiled faintly. "Peace is just the pause between storms." They reached the small airfield before noon. A C-12 Huron waited on the tarmac, engines whining in slow circles. Before boarding, Ruiz handed her a file. Inside, photos, reports, and one familiar image, a collapsed pier. Underneath it, 6 names. Lee's breath caught on the last one. Petty Officer Thomas Vance. She could still hear his laugh, still see him handing her coffee before every briefing. "Read it when you're ready," Ruiz said. "Then they're asking for your statement. The official record still says unconfirmed leadership response. You never debriefed." Lee closed the folder. "Maybe the record doesn't need the truth." Ruiz met her eyes. "Maybe you do." The flight droned low over clouds, the world below a patchwork of green and grief. Lee sat with her hands clasped, knuckles white against fatigue. She thought about the first day she'd joined, 22, reckless, unstoppable. She'd believed in missions, in structure, in the idea that courage could be clean. Now she knew better. Courage was messy. It bled, it aged, it learned humility one scar at a time. She closed her eyes, and for a heartbeat she was back on the pier, the water red, the air screaming with chaos. Vance yelling for extraction, the chopper too far, the tide too strong. Her own voice over comms, "Hold position, I'm coming." Then the explosion, then the water swallowing sound. She jolted awake. The engines hummed. Ruiz pretended not to notice. "Still with us?" she asked quietly. "Always," Lee said, but her voice broke on the word. They landed at a coastal installation, gray concrete, gray sea, gray purpose. Inside the debriefing room, the walls were lined with photographs of people who'd come before. Some smiling, some not. "All gone." A colonel greeted her with the detached politeness of bureaucracy. "Chief Monroe, thank you for agreeing to speak." "Didn't say I agreed." He gave a thin smile. "You're here, that's enough." He pressed record. "Tell us about Operation Tigress." Lee stared at the microphone, that small, blinking red light that had no idea what it was asking for. She inhaled slowly. Then quietly she began. "We were supposed to retrieve hostages from an offshore processing pier. Weather turned. Intel was wrong. We were ambushed. I gave the order to split teams." Her throat tightened. "I shouldn't have." The colonel leaned forward. "But your decision saved half the unit." "It killed the other half," she said. Silence. Finally he said, "Command will note the circumstances. No disciplinary action." She laughed once, a sound without humor. "You think I care about action. I care about their names." She pushed the folder toward him. "If you need an official statement, write this. They fought, they died, we learned nothing." Then she stood and walked out. Ruiz caught up with her outside. "You okay?" Lee's jaw tightened. "They want closure, not truth. They can keep it." Ruiz put a hand on her shoulder. "You can still decide what you carry back." Lee looked at the horizon, where the sea met sky without distinction. "Maybe I just carry less." The wind smelled of salt, familiar, forgiving. For a moment she let it wash over her, eyes half closed. Then she said softly, "I'm not done teaching yet." Ruiz smiled. Then go finish the lesson. When she returned to Fort Moore 3 days later, dawn was just breaking. The recruits were already running drills, slower without her voice guiding rhythm. Hayes stood by the gate, hands in pockets watching the road. When he saw her, he grinned. Back so soon? They ran out of closure, she said. He chuckled. We kept your spot on the mat. She looked past him toward the gym. The faint black X was still there. Good, she said. It's where we left the truth. That night she stood again on the same steps, the silver coin resting in her palm. The rain had stopped. Stars shimmered faintly between clouds. She whispered the 6 names under her breath, not as guilt anymore, but as gratitude. Then she slipped the coin into her pocket, stood, and walked toward the gym. Inside, the recruits were waiting. She didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was steady, almost gentle. Every scar, she said, is a place the truth got out. They listened silent, reverent. She smiled faintly. Let's train. Because sometimes redemption isn't a ceremony. It's just showing up, again and again, until the ghosts start listening instead of haunting. Why did the letter arrive in gold trim instead of the usual gray? Because glory always dresses itself better than truth. It came 3 days after her return. Delivered by courier, sealed with the crest of Naval Special Warfare Command. Inside, an invitation. Chief Petty Officer Lee Monroe is hereby nominated for meritorious reinstatement and public commendation in recognition of extraordinary conduct. Below it, a signature she recognized, an admiral who hadn't been on the pier that night, but had written its history anyway. She read it twice, then folded it carefully and slid it under her coffee cup to keep it from blowing away in the fan's breeze. The paper didn't move, neither did she. Hayes found her like that an hour later. Good news, he asked. She didn't look up. Depends who you ask. They're finally acknowledging what you did. She gave a faint smile, or rewriting what they didn't. That afternoon, she joined the recruits for endurance drills. The air was thick, the Georgia sun brutal. Sweat turned to dust, lungs burned. She ran beside them, her pace steady, her breathing quiet, the same rhythm that once synchronized whole teams through night raids and surf entries. When they reached the ridge, one recruit collapsed. Lee knelt instantly, checked pulse, hydration, breathing. You're fine, she said softly. You just forgot to listen to your body before it started shouting. The boy managed a weak laugh. She stood, offering her hand. Next time, run smarter, not harder. He grinned, yes, ma'am. Hayes watched from a distance, arms folded, admiration hidden behind his usual composure. He'd seen medals given for less heart, and wars started for less wisdom. That evening, he joined her at the gym. Command wants to fly you to D.C., he said. Ceremony, cameras, interviews. Lee didn't stop cleaning the mats. I don't do cameras. They think it'll inspire others. Maybe it'll help them sleep better, she said quietly. He hesitated. And you, would it help you? She looked up. I sleep fine when I don't remember. He nodded. You always talk like peace is earned through forgetting. She shook her head. No, through forgiving, but I'm not there yet. That night the base went dark early. Generators hummed under a low, restless wind. Lee sat on her bunk, the award letter open on the pillow. She stared at the words public commendation. Her reflection wavered faintly in the metal of her locker. What would she even say, standing under lights again? How do you thank a system that names you a hero for surviving the men it forgot to bury properly? She folded the paper once more, tighter this time, and tucked it into the side pocket of her duffel next to the coin. Some honors weigh more than wounds. The next morning, Ruiz called. Command confirmed the ceremony date, 2 weeks. I'm not attending. You don't have a choice, Lee. This one's already on the calendar. So our memorials, Lee said. There was a pause on the line, heavy, human. Then Ruiz said softly, you could use your speech. Tell it your way. That thought lingered long after the call ended. Later that day, she walked the perimeter trail alone. The pine needles cracked under her boots. The air smelled of rain and rust. She reached a clearing overlooking the base, rows of barracks, the flagpole, the tiny figure of a young soldier running drills exactly the way she used to. Her chest tightened. It wasn't pride. It was something older, the ache of seeing time move on without permission. She thought of Vance again. His grin before missions. His voice saying, you keep the team steady, Chief. We follow you. She whispered into the wind, you shouldn't have. At dusk, she returned to the gym. The recruits had gone. The floor was empty except for her reflection in the glass. She stared at the faint X in the corner, the mark that never faded. For a moment, she imagined standing at that podium in D.C., the cameras flashing, her scar catching light the same way it had that day in the gym. The crowd would clap, the speeches would praise sacrifice. And somewhere between sentences, 6 names would go unsaid because they complicated the headline. Her throat tightened. She slammed the mop handle into the bucket, water splashing across her boots. Heroes, she muttered, they always forget the cost. Hayes appeared at the doorway, quiet as usual. He watched her for a moment before speaking. You know, he said, most people spend their whole lives waiting to be recognized. You're fighting it like it's a punishment. She turned toward him. Recognition doesn't erase consequence. He nodded, but it can redefine memory. She gave a tired smile. That's what scares me. He stepped inside, his voice lower now. You don't have to stand alone in this. I've always stood alone. Not anymore, he said. These recruits, they look at you and see what strength can be. That's legacy, Lee, not headlines. Her eyes softened just a fraction. Then let's keep it that way, she said. A week passed. Orders confirmed her travel to Washington. Uniform pressed, itinerary signed. She was scheduled to depart on a Thursday. But 2 nights before the flight, something happened that changed everything. A storm rolled through at midnight, violent, sudden, electric. Wind tore through the training field, ripping flags from poles and hurling debris into the night. Alarms sounded, power flickered. Lee was one of the first out of bed, boots laced before the others even woke. She moved through the corridor, flashlight cutting white beams through chaos. Outside, she heard shouting. One of the barracks roofs had given way under wind pressure. Metal sheeting hung like jagged teeth, rain pouring through the gap. Someone screamed for help. Without hesitation, she climbed the railing, rain slashing against her face. Get back inside, Hayes yelled from below. She ignored him. 2 soldiers were trapped beneath part of the roof structure, one bleeding from a deep cut, the other pinned by debris. Lee dropped to her knees, pushing against the twisted metal. Her muscles trembled, rain blurred everything. Hold still, she said through gritted teeth. She braced, shifted leverage, that old instinct kicking in like a forgotten language, and with a guttural cry, she freed the pinned soldier. They stumbled clear just as another gust tore the corner beam loose. The crash behind them shook the ground. Hayes rushed forward, grabbing her arm. Are you insane? Probably, she said, breathless, smiling faintly. But it worked. When dawn came, the storm was gone. The damage was visible, roofs torn, trees down, but everyone was alive. Reporters would later call it base structural failure during severe weather. No one mentioned the woman who'd gone out in the middle of it. But the soldiers did. They talked about her differently after that, not with fear or awe, but with something deeper, belonging. Hayes found her later, sitting against the wall, exhausted but smiling faintly. Guess you're ready for that commendation now, he said. She shook her head. I'm ready for breakfast. He chuckled. You know they're going to want to film you saving those two. Let them film the roof, she said. That's the real hero. 2 days later, she stood at the gate again. The SUV waited to take her to the airfield. Ruiz was already inside, tablet in hand. Lee hesitated. Hayes approached quietly, sensing the war in her silence. You don't have to go, he said. She looked at him. If I don't, they'll rewrite it without me. He nodded slowly, then make them listen. She smiled a rare genuine smile. I'll try. He saluted. Bring that coin back with you. Always, she said. The flight to Washington was uneventful, clouds below, silence above. She sat by the window, her reflection ghosted against the fading daylight. Ruiz worked on her tablet beside her, pretending not to notice Lee's clenched fists. When the plane began its descent, Ruiz said quietly, You can still change what this means. Lee looked out at the city lights. That's the plan. The ceremony hall was immaculate. Marble, flags, cameras, rows of medals gleaming under artificial light. Officers lined up like a tableau of pride and absence. Lee stood off stage, her hand steady, her heart not. Through the curtain she could see the audience, reporters, dignitaries, families. She thought of her own team, 6 names, 6 shadows. The announcer's voice boomed. Chief Petty Officer Lee Monroe, for valor, leadership, and exceptional service under fire. Applause erupted. She stepped forward, boots echoing like slow thunder across polished floors. Each step a heartbeat. Each heartbeat a ghost. When she reached the podium, she didn't look at the cameras. She looked at the flag. And when the microphone light blinked red, she began. I was told this ceremony is for recognition, she said, but recognition belongs to those who didn't come home. The room went still. She continued, voice low but unwavering. I led men and women who followed orders without question, and because of that, some never saw another sunrise. So if you're here for hero stories, you're in the wrong room. This isn't about glory. It's about accountability. Whispers rippled through the crowd, but she didn't stop. We talk about strength. Let me tell you, strength is carrying their names long after everyone forgets them. She paused, looked directly at the rows of cameras. And for those still serving, remember, medals fade, dignity doesn't. She saluted, turned, and walked off stage before anyone could stop her. Outside, the air was cold and clear. Ruiz caught up, breathless. You just rewrote the script. Lee smiled faintly. Good, it needed editing. She took out the silver coin, turning it between her fingers. The metal felt warm despite the chill. Guess I can go home now, she said softly. Ruiz frowned. Fort Moore. Lee nodded. It's the only place that remembers the truth. Because real honor isn't handed to you on a stage. It's earned quietly, in the moments no one films, when you choose integrity over applause. Why did the silence after her speech feel louder than applause? Because truth, when spoken in a room built for ceremony, doesn't echo, it detonates. The moment she walked off stage, the air shifted. No one clapped. No one moved. Commanders exchanged tight glances, publicists froze mid-smile, and the admiral who had signed her commendation leaned forward, whispering something to his aide that sounded like damage control. Lee didn't wait to hear it. She walked straight past the cameras, past the corridors of marble and ego, and into the cold D.C. air where the city hummed, oblivious. Her footsteps were the only applause she needed. Ruiz caught up with her outside. You know, you just turned a PR event into a confession hearing, she said. Lee zipped her jacket calm. Maybe the truth needed better lighting. Ruiz laughed once, sharp, nervous. Command won't take that well. They never do, Lee said softly. Not when silence stops working. By evening, her name was trending. Not for the medal, for the speech. Navy SEAL speaks out against hero worship. Lee Monroe challenges command narrative. The woman who said no to glory. Reporters flooded inboxes. Producers called for interviews. Half the public called her brave. The other half called her insubordinate. The military called her unavailable for comment. She ignored all of it. Instead, she packed her duffel and boarded the next outbound flight. Destination, Fort Moore. Her only home that wasn't haunted, or maybe the only one where ghosts had learned her name. When she arrived, dawn was bleeding into horizon mist. The base looked the same, structured, quiet, waiting. Hayes was there at the gate, as if he'd known exactly when she'd return. He didn't speak, just offered a thermos of coffee. She took it, nodded once, and said, "I didn't get fired." He smiled. "You didn't get promoted either." "Perfect," she said. They walked the path back to the barracks together. Around them, the trees whispered the same way the sea used to, soft, endless, forgiving. Hayes finally said, "They'll try to bury your words." She shrugged. "They can't, too many heard them." He looked at her sideways. "You wanted this fallout." "No," she said, "but I wanted them to stop calling silence honorable." For a few weeks, things seemed normal again, or as normal as they could be for someone who'd just shaken the system. Lee returned to teaching, back on the mats, correcting stances, speaking softly, rarely mentioning D.C. The recruits never brought it up, but their eyes had changed. There was a kind of reverence there now, not for legend, but for authenticity. She wasn't a hero to them anymore. She was a mirror. When they stumbled, she reminded them. Strength isn't about winning. It's about standing back up after losing with grace. And somehow, that hit harder than any drill. But not everyone was silent. 2 weeks after her return, Hayes called her into his office. He looked uneasy. "Orders from up top," he said. "They're reviewing your reinstatement status. Someone upstairs wants to make an example out of you." Lee tilted her head. "For telling the truth. For telling it where cameras could hear." He hesitated. "They'll question your authority to train, maybe suspend you pending review." Lee exhaled through her nose, steady, unsurprised. "Then I guess we'll find out how much truth this place can handle." That night she sat alone in the dark gym. The mats were rolled up, the lights off, the air thick with echoes of every command she'd ever given. Somewhere outside, a generator hummed, the same dull rhythm as her heartbeat. She lay back on the mat and stared at the ceiling. The black X was still faintly visible in the corner, shadowed by moonlight through the window. She whispered into the stillness. "You'd laugh at me, Vance. I'm still fighting for ghosts." Her voice trembled. "I told them the truth. I told them your names. That should count for something." She closed her eyes. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like surrender, the peaceful kind that finally lets you breathe. The next morning she was summoned. Conference room, 900. Hayes was already there, standing behind her like quiet armor. Across the table sat 3 officers, clean uniforms, clean consciences, clean distance from war. One of them, a colonel with perfectly ironed sleeves, spoke first. "Sergeant Monroe, we've reviewed your recent statements and determined they may constitute a breach of communication protocol." Lee's tone was calm. "You mean telling the truth?" He frowned. "Public dissemination of internal failures undermines morale." "Morale built on silence isn't morale," she said. "It's denial." The room stiffened. Hayes shifted his weight but said nothing. Another officer leaned forward. "You were given a platform to inspire. Instead, you criticized command." "I criticized the myth," Lee corrected, "not the men." The colonel tapped the table. "Your attitude reflects poorly on." Hayes cut in, his voice low but sharp. Careful, sir. She's done more for morale in this base than any policy memo. The colonel glared at him. We're not debating admiration, Sergeant Major. We're discussing compliance. Lee leaned back. Then you already have your answer. The silence that followed was colder than punishment. Finally, they dismissed her pending review. Hayes followed her out. They're going to strip your clearance, he said quietly. Then I'll keep training without it. You'll lose your access. She stopped walking. They can take my access, not my voice. That night she didn't sleep. She walked the empty base instead, through the rain-slick parade ground, past the barracks, to the far edge where the pine line broke into open field. There the wind came raw, unfiltered. She looked up at the storm clouds and whispered, "You were right, Hayes. Peace and forgiveness don't wear the same face." The air didn't answer, but the rain did, soft, steady, cleansing. She stayed there until dawn, soaked but calm, her heart strangely light. For the first time, she didn't feel like she was hiding from her past. She felt like she was walking beside it. The following morning, something unexpected happened. When Lee entered the gym, the recruits were already there, all of them standing at attention. The mats were spotless, the gear aligned, and on the far wall, someone had painted a small emblem. A trident, an anchor, an eagle drawn in black marker, subtle, defiant. She froze. "Who authorized that?" she asked. Private Miller stepped forward. "We did, ma'am." "Why?" He hesitated. "Because command might forget, but we won't." Lee stared at the symbol for a long time. Then she said softly, "Erase it before inspection." Miller looked pained. "Yes, ma'am." But as she turned away, he added quietly, "We took a photo first." She didn't answer. Didn't need to. Her throat tightened not from anger but from something purer, understanding. Later that day, Hayes entered her office carrying a brown envelope. "No insignia this time," he said. She raised an eyebrow. "That's either good or terrible." He handed it over. "Command decision. You're relieved from formal instruction pending reassignment." She exhaled slowly. "So that's it." "Not quite," Hayes said. "They can't decide where to send you. No unit wants the PR risk." A smile ghosted across her face. "Good. Means I did something right." He nodded. "They can take the position, Lee, but not what you built here." She looked past him, through the window at the recruits training on the field, strong, steady, synchronized. "They'll be fine," she said. "That's the point." That evening, she returned to the gym one last time. The floor gleamed. The faint X was still there, darker now, from years of polish and memory. She knelt, placed her palm on it, and closed her eyes. A whisper escaped her lips. This was never about staying. It was about leaving right. She stood, turned off the lights, and stepped into the corridor, the sound of her boots echoing like the heartbeat of a place she'd rebuilt from silence. Outside, Hayes waited by the truck. "Where to now?" he asked. She looked up at the stars. "Somewhere quiet." He smiled. "That narrows it down to nowhere." She smirked. "Perfect." As they drove away, the base lights faded behind them, swallowed by night. No parade, no farewell. Just two soldiers who understood that legacy doesn't always wear rank. Sometimes it just leaves footprints that refuse to wash away. Lee leaned her head against the window. In her hand, the silver coin gleamed faintly with passing headlights. She whispered the 6 names again, softer this time, not as penance as promise. Then she closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she slept without dreaming. Because truth isn't rebellion. It's loyalty to those who can't speak anymore. Why did she settle by the sea? Because waves never ask questions, they just keep arriving. 3 months after Fort Moore, Lee Monroe disappeared from military maps. No forwarding address, no active clearance, no command contact. She rented a small wooden house on the Carolina coast, paint peeling, porch crooked, roof humming when the wind blew from the east. Perfect. Her mornings were simple now, coffee, sand, silence. She ran along the surf until her scars stopped stinging, then sat and watched the tide erase her footprints. Each day began the same, and that sameness felt like mercy. Locals called her the quiet lady by the dunes. They saw the discipline, the 500 jogs, the straight posture, but none guessed the history behind it. She liked it that way. For once, anonymity felt like armor. At night, the ocean spoke to her in static, soft roars that blurred memory and forgiveness. Sometimes she heard voices in the wind, Vance laughing, her team teasing her for making coffee too strong. Other nights, she said nothing at all. Just listened. She still kept the silver coin on the windowsill, where moonlight touched it like a metal no one had to pin. Some evenings she'd pick it up, roll it between her fingers and whisper, "You'd hate retirement, Tom." Then she'd smile and let the sea finish the conversation. One morning, the mail truck left a package on her porch. Plain brown, no return address. Inside, a folded map, a flash drive, and a note in neat military print. "They're back in trouble, Fort Moore. Hayes injured, training collapse, need leadership, your choice." Her chest tightened. The handwriting was Hayes's, too clean, too measured, but the message was real. Attached to the flash drive was a small tag etched with coordinates. She plugged it into her old laptop. Footage. Rain-blurred handheld. Recruits running through collapsed scaffolding, shouting. A voice calm, commanding Hayes's, calling for order. Then a crash. The camera tumbled. Static. Lee's hands clenched the desk. She replayed it once, twice again, searching for breath, for proof. None came. She closed the laptop slowly. The ocean outside had turned steel gray. She didn't pack much, just her duffel, her uniform, and the coin. By nightfall she was on the road, the sky bleeding orange into indigo. Her reflection in the window looked like a stranger she almost recognized. Halfway there she stopped for gas. The clerk, a kid barely 20, noticed her uniform folded on the seat. "You military?" he asked. "Used to be." He nodded with innocent admiration. "Thank you for your service." She smiled gently. "Don't thank me yet." Then she drove on. Fort Moore appeared at dawn, quiet, scarred, familiar. The gate guards froze when she showed her old ID, half expired, half legend. "Ma'am, It'll scan," she said softly. It did. Inside, the base looked smaller than she remembered, or maybe she'd just outgrown its walls. Emergency crews moved near the obstacle course. Caution tape fluttered in morning wind. Hayes sat on a folding chair, leg wrapped, face pale but determined. When he saw her, his tired eyes widened, then softened. "Didn't think you'd come." "You didn't ask," she said. He grinned weakly, still good at that. She crouched beside him. "How bad?" "Broken tibia. 2 recruits in the infirmary. We were testing a new climbing rig, cable snapped." "Whose design?" "Command-issued prototype." She exhaled slowly. "Figures." The recruit spotted her next. Whispers rippled through the crowd like wind through tall grass. "She came back. I thought she got suspended." "She's the one from the speech." Lee ignored it all. She moved straight to the wreckage, examining bolts, joints, tension lines. A single glance told her enough. Rushed assembly, ignored safety specs. Her voice came steady, professional. "This isn't an accident, it's negligence." Hayes grimaced. "I said the same thing, they called it operator error." "Then they're lying." He nodded. "And you're going to prove it, aren't you?" She looked at him. "If I walk away, who teaches them to do better?" By afternoon she was back on the mats, brace and all, instructing again. Command hadn't approved it, she didn't care. Her presence alone steadied the recruits. She spoke less now, but each word carried weight. Check your lines, every connection's a life. Never trust what's already trusted, verify it. Complacency kills quicker than bullets. They listened. Even Bricks, now humbled and serving under Hayes, stood quietly at the back, nodding. He approached her after class. "Good to have you back, ma'am." She smiled faintly. "You learned something after all." He chuckled. "Payne's a good teacher." She nodded. "So's regret." That evening, Hayes called her into his office. A stack of reports sat on his desk. "They're sending investigators tomorrow, Safety Commission. They'll want statements." "Let them," she said. "This time they'll hear the truth." He leaned back, studying her. "You realize they might see your presence here as interference." She shrugged. "They already think that, might as well make it useful." He smiled. "You never change." "I did," she said softly. "I just stopped pretending not to care." At midnight she couldn't sleep. She walked the dark corridors alone, the base lights flickering in intervals like heartbeats. Outside the rain began again, thin, persistent. She found herself standing before the training field, the collapsed rig covered by tarps. Lightning flashed, revealing the black X still faint on the gym mat through the open door. She stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and memory. She knelt, touching the mark, whispering, "Still here." Her voice trembled. "I came back, not for medals, not for command, for you, for them, for what's right." The wind answered by rattling the windows, as if the building itself remembered her words. Morning brought inspectors, crisp suits, clipped voices, sterile questions. They measured distances, recorded statements, blamed weather. Lee stood by quietly until one of them dismissed her assessment. "Your expertise is outdated, Sergeant." She looked at him evenly. "So is your accountability." Hayes smothered a grin. "She's got a point." The man flushed. "We'll file our report." "Make sure it includes negligence," Lee said. "Otherwise, I'll file mine publicly." The room went silent. The lead inspector met her eyes, recognized something unshakable there, and nodded. "We'll review." When they left, Hayes laughed under his breath. "Still making friends, I see." Lee smirked. "Only the honest ones." That afternoon, she visited the infirmary. The injured recruits were awake, bruised but alive. One looked up, pale but smiling. "Ma'am, you came back." "I never really left," she said. Another recruit whispered, "We thought we failed you." Lee shook her head. "You don't fail by falling, you fail by staying down." They smiled weakly. Her voice softened. "Rest now, the next lesson about standing up again." As she left, she heard one of them murmur, "That's our even if the paperwork says different." She pretended not to hear, but her throat tightened all the same. By sunset, the sky cleared. She and Hayes stood by the field, watching the recruits jog their evening laps. "They're stronger now," he said. "They were always strong," she replied. "They just needed someone to remind them." He turned to her. "You staying this time?" She considered it. "Maybe, if they'll have me." He smiled. "They already do." She looked at the fading horizon, the sunlight catching her scar just so, like a quiet medal no ceremony could match. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was returning or running. She felt home. That night she stood outside under a full moon. The base slept. She held the silver coin once more, tracing the edges with her thumb. "I thought leaving would bring peace," she whispered. "Turns out, peace was waiting for me here once I stopped hiding from the fight." She closed her hand around the coin and smiled faintly. Not triumphant, content. In the distance, thunder rolled again, but it sounded different this time. not warning. Reminder. The kind that says storms don't always mean danger. Sometimes they mean renewal. She turned toward the barracks lights and began walking. Each step slower, easier, surer. Behind her, the ocean of recruits, past and present, kept running in rhythm. Ahead, the quiet future waited like an open door. Because some battles aren't meant to be won. They're meant to be carried, until someone else learns how to fight them better. Why did the sky look so calm that morning? Because sometimes the world holds its breath before it listens. Fort Moore woke to sunlight and silence. No alarms, no orders, just the hum of early routine. Lee stood outside the barracks, coffee in hand, watching the recruits form ranks across the field. Their cadence calls rose crisp and steady, echoing off the walls she'd once wanted to leave behind. She smiled. They sounded right. Balanced. Alive. Hayes joined her, cane tapping softly against gravel. Doctor says I'll walk without this next month. Doctor's optimistic, she teased. He smirked, and you're still here. For now. He studied her. You think command's letting it go. They will if they're smart, she said. And if they're not. She took a slow sip of coffee. Then they'll remind me why I stopped believing in ranks. By mid-morning, a black SUV rolled through the gate, tinted windows, federal plates. Hayes spotted it first. Looks like your fan club's back. Lee didn't move, no autographs. Two officers stepped out. Not inspectors this time, investigators. Plain suits, hard eyes, voices clipped from too many rehearsals. Sergeant Monroe, one said, we're conducting a follow-up on your statements in D.C. and recent base activities. We'll need a word. Of course, she replied calm. Would you like truth or protocol first? They didn't smile. This isn't adversarial. Then you're already losing, she said quietly, and walked them toward Hayes's office. Inside, the air felt tight. Folders, recorders, the sound of pens tapping impatience. The lead investigator began. You've repeatedly made unauthorized public statements regarding internal failures during Operation Tideglass and subsequent training incidents. Are you aware that violates Article? Lee interrupted, I'm aware. He blinked, then why continue? Because people died following silence, she said evenly. I'd rather break code than bury another recruit. The second officer leaned forward. Your outspokenness jeopardizes confidence in command. Lee met his stare. Command earned its confidence. It can earn it back. They shifted uncomfortably. One scribbled something in the margin, probably the word insubordinate. Hayes cleared his throat. Gentlemen, you came for a confession. She's already given you one. She told the truth. That's all there is. They ignored him. The first officer stood. Sergeant Monroe, pending review, you are relieved of all instructional duties. Lee nodded once, then review it thoroughly. She took her name tag off the uniform and set it gently on the desk. I don't need a title to serve, she said. Word spread fast. By noon, every recruit on base knew she'd been relieved again. But instead of whispers, there was silence, the kind that carries respect. When she left the office, they were waiting in two lines along the corridor. No orders, no plan. Just presence. Each soldier straightened as she passed, fists pressed to hearts. Not salute. Something older. Something real. She stopped halfway down the line, voice steady. You keep this place honest. That's all I ever wanted. Private Miller, still that same young face from months ago, spoke up. Ma'am, what happens now? Lee smiled faintly. Now you lead, and you do it better than we did. That evening she sat on the roof of the gym, knees drawn to her chest, the silver coin glinting in her palm. Below her, the field shimmered under floodlights. Every shout, Every footstep from the recruits below blended into a rhythm that sounded like the pulse of something she'd almost lost: purpose. Hayes climbed up behind her, slower now, still stubborn. "You're supposed to rest that leg," she said. "I'm supposed to keep an eye on trouble," he replied. He handed her a folder, thick, sealed, stamped confidential. "They sent this by courier. It's your final review." She didn't take it. "What's it say?" "Officially, administrative closure. Unofficially, they're done fighting you." She smiled. "They never knew how." He hesitated. "So what will you do?" She looked at the stars. "Same thing I've always done. Train whoever's willing to learn, whether they wear a uniform or not." Weeks passed. No orders came. No one replaced her. Yet every morning, recruits still gathered unofficially by the shore beyond the base fence. Word had spread: Monroe teaches at sunrise. They came quietly off duty, no insignia. Just people who wanted to understand strength without ceremony. She didn't advertise it. Didn't even call it training. She just showed up. They learned breathing, balance, situational awareness, but mostly they learned stillness. Know when to act, she told them, but more importantly, know when to stop fighting. After each session, she walked the wet sand alone until footprints vanished behind her. Every erased mark felt like a blessing. One morning, she found a letter slipped under her door. No seal, just plain handwriting. "They're reopening Tiglass records. Families want your testimony. They're asking for the truth officially this time." She read it twice. The ocean outside was calm. Then she folded the paper and stared at the horizon. Hayes found her an hour later, still standing there. "You're not going back into that storm," he said. "I think the storm's finally ready to listen. You already gave them everything." "Not the peace," she said softly. "That's still mine to give." The hearing was held in a plain gray room, nothing ceremonial, just 4 families, 2 officers, and a recorder. She wore no uniform. No ribbons. Only the scar and the quiet that came with it. When she spoke, her voice was calm, almost gentle. She told them what really happened: every choice, every failure, every act of courage that never made the reports. No dramatics. No blame. Just truth. By the end, one mother was crying softly. A father reached across the table and took her hand. "Thank you," he whispered, "for not lying to us." She nodded. They deserve better than stories. Afterward, she walked outside into sunlight so bright it hurt her eyes. For once, the weight in her chest felt lighter. The truth was finally out, not shouted, not broadcast, just placed gently where it belonged. When she returned to the coast, the house felt different. Not emptier, freer. The sea greeted her like an old comrade, steady, unchanged. She set the silver coin back on the windowsill. Next to it she placed a small folded note from the hearing, the family's signatures, and 6 names written neatly below. She traced each one with her fingertip. This time it didn't hurt. It healed. A week later, Hayes visited, still limping, still loyal. "Retirement looks good on you," he said. "Retirement looks like boredom," she replied. "Then come back," he said. "We're building a new program, ethical leadership. I told command you already wrote the syllabus." She laughed, the kind of laugh she hadn't allowed herself in years. "Me teaching ethics, that's poetic." "Exactly," he said. She thought about it, staring at the horizon. Maybe purpose didn't have to mean combat. Maybe redemption could sound like guidance instead of gunfire. Finally she nodded. "One condition." "Name it." "No ranks, no medals, just names." Hayes smiled. "Deal." Months later, the first class of the new program gathered under the same gym roof. On the wall behind the podium, painted in quiet gray letters, were words she'd once said without meaning to start anything. Strength is silence that commands a room. She stood before them, no uniform, just presence. And when she began speaking, her voice carried through the hall like a calm wave breaking. This isn't about winning wars. It's about ending them the right way. It's about leading without losing yourself. Every recruit listened, not to a legend, but to a woman who had stopped running from her own reflection. That evening, after the lights dimmed and the hall emptied, Lee stayed behind. She sat on the edge of the mat, where the faint black X still marked the spot. Her hand rested over it. Her breathing slowed. Outside, the sea wind found its way through open windows, carrying salt and memory. She whispered one last time, "Still here?" And for the first time, it didn't sound like a promise or an apology. It sounded like peace. Because dignity doesn't shout or demand or shine under medals. It endures quietly, endlessly, like the tide returning home.